This morning, Harold and Loretta Thompson walked into a bank they built, and the staff looked at them like they didn't belong. They weren't dressed flashy. Harold wore a blazer he'd owned for years. Loretta had her silver-gray hair wrapped in a soft blue scarf. Nothing about them screamed power or ownership. But there was quiet pride in the way they walked, and purpose. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They weren't there to ask for help. They were there to check on the heart of a business they had poured decades into, Liberty Crest Bank, the flagship branch, downtown. The place they started with one borrowed office, one denied loan, and one unwavering belief that black folks, seniors included, deserved a seat at the table of finance. But today, no one saw any of that. As soon as they stepped into the lobby, the shift was clear. The receptionist stiffened. The security guard straightened his posture. A junior banker behind the desk lowered his voice. Harold greeted them warmly. "Good morning." The receptionist offered a tight nod. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Loretta answered. "We're just here to visit the executive offices." Her tone was calm. Her words were simple. But to the woman behind the desk, something about it didn't add up. "I'm sorry," she said, "but the executive level is restricted. It's not open to the public." The word public hung in the air like a cloud of dust. They weren't members of the public. They were co-founders of the corporation, chairwoman of the board, president of the holding group. But the woman didn't ask for a name. She didn't check a list. She just assumed. It wasn't anger that hit Harold first. It was a familiar kind of tiredness, the type that black men of a certain age carry with quiet dignity, the kind you learn not to show on your face, even when you're standing in a building that exists because of your name. Then came Kyle, the junior associate in a pressed blue suit, 20-something, fresh MBA, the type who leads with charm and speaks in bullet points. He stepped up quickly, confident that he was solving a problem. "Hi there," he said. "We'd be happy to help you over at the personal banking desk. If you're here to open a CD or set up a retirement consultation, I can connect you with one of our financial specialists." Harold said nothing. He simply glanced at Loretta. Loretta, never the loud one, looked Kyle straight in the eye. "We're not here to open a CD." Kyle smiled, still not catching on. Of course. If you'd like to speak with a manager, I can check availability. Do you remember their name?" Harold's hands stayed in his pockets. His voice was still low, even. "No need for that. We are the ones you're supposed to remember." Kyle blinked, confused. The receptionist looked over, eyebrows raised. The security guard, now standing 5 feet away, radioed at his belt, hovered just close enough to signal control. And that's when Loretta reached into her purse. No drama, no announcement, just a small leather card case. She pulled out 2 embossed ID badges and placed them on the desk. Kyle looked down. Loretta A. Thompson, chairwoman of the board. Harold E. Thompson, president and co-founder. Silence. Not embarrassed, at least not right away. What came first was disbelief. Then the recognition set in. Then the discomfort. Then the rush of apologies. But the damage was already done. This wasn't about one mistake. It wasn't about protocol. It was about perception. No one imagined that 2 elderly black individuals could be the very people who signed the paychecks, who sat on the board, who approved the design of that building, who wrote the original mission statement of equity and inclusion that the bank loved to print in its annual reports. Because when Harold and Loretta walked in, they weren't read as founders. They were read as others, and that's the point. Bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the pause before a greeting, the sideways glance, the assumption that age and race disqualify one from holding authority. Sometimes it's wrapped in politeness, in a security protocol, in just following policy. But underneath it all is a quiet refusal to see. And for Harold and Loretta, that refusal didn't surprise them. Not anymore. What surprised them was how easily it happened, in their own house. and what came next would make sure it wouldn't happen again. It wasn't the first time someone underestimated them, but it might be the last time they did it inside that bank. Harold and Loretta stepped into the executive conference room like two storms hiding in calm skies. No need for theatrics. Their very presence turned heads, not because they were loud, but because something about them didn't fit the script. A woman in her early 30s, sleek bun, pearl earrings, clipboard in hand, glanced up and smiled politely. Then paused. That smile faltered just a second too long. "Can I help you find the right floor?" she asked. Harold gave a soft smile in return. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." The room filled slowly. Mid-level managers, regional executives, and consultants who are charged by the minute. They made eye contact with one another, but not with the couple seated quietly at the far end of the table. No one recognized them. That was part of the problem. The meeting began. Charts went up. Acronyms were thrown around. Everyone babbled, sharply and eagerly to make an impression. No one asked why two elders sat listening silently in chairs that, by all logic, should have been occupied by clients or guests. Then Loretta stood. No notes, no slideshow, just that blue scarf she always wore when things mattered. "I'd like to tell you a story," she said, her voice warm like a memory but firm like a verdict. "A long time ago, two young dreamers walked into a bank not unlike this one. They were told they didn't qualify, not for loans, not for trust, not even for time." The room stilled. Some leaned forward, sensing they were no longer in a routine Monday review. Instead of giving up, they built their own. One client at a time, one branch at a time. They promised it would feel different. That dignity would never depend on your suit or your skin. That power wouldn't wear a name tag, but carry a name. She paused. Then Harold stood beside her, slowly but solidly. "That was us," he said. The silence in the room took on a different shape. It was no longer awkward. It was seismic. People blinked, adjusted in their seats. Some looked down. Others suddenly noticed the small bronze pins on Harold's lapel, the initials of Liberty Crest, carved in the very first year of incorporation. "You've been running numbers," Harold said, "but not all numbers are equal. Some of them are rooted in names, in history, in sacrifice." The woman with the clipboard looked pale. Another exec reached for his coffee, but his hand trembled. Loretta stepped forward, not closer to them, but deeper into their conscience. "This morning," she continued, "we were mistaken for walk-ins, advised to wait in line, offered pamphlets on retirement savings, as if we were here to be served." She smiled. But it wasn't the soft kind. It was the kind of smile a mother gives before saying something you'll remember for life. "Let me be clear. We didn't come here to be served. We came to see if the house we built still stands on the values we laid beneath it." A man near the window, a senior strategist, finally found his voice. "We're deeply sorry," he said, standing halfway. "Had we known—" "You didn't," Harold said simply. "That's the point." His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, surgical, a voice that knew how to lead even when no one was listening. Loretta added, "You don't need to apologize to us, but you owe something to every elder who walks through that door and is treated like they don't belong. You owe it to every black client who's been smiled at politely but dismissed quietly." The projector screen behind them flickered with frozen numbers, still waiting for analysis. But no one was looking anymore. All eyes were on two people who'd come without fanfare, without title introductions. Just presence. A presence so grounded, it made every suit in the room feel smaller. "I hope," Harold said finally, "that when you leave this meeting, you don't remember our names because of what we own. I hope you remember us because we reminded you who this place is for." He turned to Loretta. She nodded. Then they walked out, not in silence, but in gravity. And for the first time that day, The room truly felt still, because real power had just left it. Not in fury, but in complete control. They didn't come to punish. That was the part no one understood. Harold and Loretta had every reason to be angry. Every reason to make phone calls, shake titles loose, and demand resignations. But they didn't. They just came back. Same time. Same bank. Same smiles. But this time, the room was different. Not the walls or the floors, but the way everyone stood. Straighter. Stiffer. The receptionist who once ignored them now greeted them by name, voice nervous but sincere. Jordan, the branch manager, was already waiting at the elevator. He had reviewed the footage from the day before so many times that it haunted him. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he said. "May I—" "We're just here to observe," Harold replied, his voice calm. "Today's yours." And with that, they walked past him, into the heart of the lobby. Then they did something no one expected. They sat. Not in a conference room, not in an office. They sat on the client bench, near the front, where the waiting usually happened. At first, everyone was confused, but slowly, they began to notice. Loretta pulled a small notepad from her purse and jotted things down. Harold had a folded newspaper, but he wasn't reading. He was listening to how people were spoken to which clients were helped first, to see how elderly visitors were greeted. He listened to silence, too, the kind that settles in when people assume someone doesn't matter. And for 2 hours, they said nothing. But their presence said everything. A young teller cracked first. She walked over and offered water. "Thank you," Loretta said gently, but didn't drink. Then an older woman entered the lobby, strolling. Breathed short. She looked around, unsure where to go. No one moved to help her. Until Harold stood, walked to her, and offered her his seat. She sat down, smiled, grateful. Then Loretta stood up and turned to everyone. "I want to tell you what just happened," she said, voice clear but not loud. "You saw an older woman enter. She was unsure. She was tired. You assumed she could wait." Eyes lowered. "But she's been waiting for years," Loretta continued. "Waiting to be respected. Waiting to be seen. Waiting for someone to look at her and say, 'We value you here.'" Harold added, "We didn't come to make you uncomfortable. We came to show you what it feels like to be invisible in a room that was built with your hands." Jordan stepped forward. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Loretta replied. "But you need to choose something." Then she held up her notepad. "This is a list of every staff member who greeted a client today with their name. Only 4. A gasp rippled. There were 22 on shift. Harold folded his newspaper. "You run numbers all day, but not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that's counted truly counts." There was no explosion, no climax, just quiet, the kind that settles into people's bones and stays there. Later that week, the branch launched a new protocol. Name first. Every client would be greeted personally and respectfully, regardless of their appearance, age, or perceived value. Not because it was policy, because it had been lived. Loretta never said the words, "We own this bank," again. She didn't need to. She'd already restored its soul. It was supposed to be just another Monday. But by 9 a.m., the energy inside Liberty Crest had shifted. Not because of something said, but because of who showed up and what they refused to ignore. 2 chairs had been removed from the waiting area overnight. In their place was a small sign that read, "People shouldn't have to wait for dignity." Signed, H and L. Most of the staff assumed it was symbolic. A gesture, a quote to nod at, then forget by lunch. But that morning, Loretta arrived early, not with a clipboard or reprimands, just a worn leather notebook and the calm steadiness of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. And then came the session. The staff were gathered in the branch's old meeting room. Windows open, no PowerPoint, just paper. Real stories, real clients. One by one, Loretta read moments, not scandals, not lawsuits, just wounds hidden in politeness. She told me, "You're probably better off keeping your savings at home. Less confusing that way." He handed the form to my daughter, even though I was the one asking the questions. Jordan, the manager, stood quietly in the corner, jaw clenched. But it was Ramirez, head of loans, who finally broke the quiet. "We're not therapists," she said. "We're bankers. We move money. We can't be expected to babysit feelings." The room went still. Harold stepped forward. "You move money," he said. "But you don't move people. That's the difference." Ramirez crossed her arms. "If you start making emotional intelligence part of the job requirement, half this team won't pass." Loretta smiled, not cruelly, but with a patience honed over decades. "Then maybe half the team needs to be somewhere else." That sentence landed like a quiet bell in a cathedral. No shouting, no threats, just truth, laid gently but unshakably. Harold opened a folder. Inside, the original ethics clause, signed by him in 1989 but never enforced. No act of professionalism is complete without a foundation of respect. Performance is not protection from principle. He placed it in front of Jordan. "You said last week that you didn't want to lose talent. Today you decide, what's your definition of talent?" There was no immediate answer, but something cracked, in Ramirez's face, in the room, in the silence that followed. 2 hours later, Ramirez turned in her resignation. No one cheered, no one scorned. She shook Harold's hand. "I think I built walls I called boundaries," she admitted. "They became fences." Harold nodded. "Better to see it now than never." And then the shift began. Not loud, not flashy. A young teller named Ellie approached Loretta with a notepad full of phrases she'd heard herself use with older clients. "No worries, sweetie. It's a little tricky. Maybe ask your son." She circled them all in red. "I didn't know I was doing it," she whispered. "But now I do." Loretta didn't scold. She handed her a new phrase. "Take your time. I'm here when you're ready." And for the first time, Ellie practiced it aloud, not as a script, but as a promise. By Friday, something small but real happened. An elderly deaf client walked in, Mr. Glover, usually quiet, often ignored. This time, the entire front desk paused. Ellie stepped out, faced him with both hands raised, and signed slowly, "Good morning. Welcome back." It wasn't perfect, but Mr. Glover smiled for the first time in 6 months. Loretta watched from afar, sitting quietly on what used to be the waiting bench, now turned into a low table holding coffee, water, and handwritten welcome cards. She didn't say a word, because she didn't have to. The culture had shifted, not by force, but by a mirror. That night, as the sun slipped behind the skyline, Harold stood at the window of their home, holding a cup of tea. "They're changing," he murmured. Loretta looked up from her reading. "No," she said softly. "They're remembering." Outside, under the fading light, the sign in front of the bank gently swayed in the breeze, and beneath the logo, a new inscription had been etched. "A machine can count your money, but only a human can count your worth." The second launch of Liberty Crest's legacy didn't begin with numbers. It started with names. Harold stood before the modest crowd in the community room. No stage, just folding chairs and a coffee urn that hissed gently in the back. On the wall behind him, in handwritten script, were the words, "The Dignity Fund, investing where humanity was once withheld." He didn't start with a speech. Instead, he opened an old black ledger. "In 1972, he said softly, This bank denied a loan to Mr. Lamont Griggs. He was 58, owned a barber shop with 5 chairs, trained 3 apprentices, never missed a rent payment in 20 years. He paused. Reason for rejection? No clear collateral. But the truth is, he was just a black man asking too confidently. The room held still. Loretta joined him, placing her hand gently over his on the book. "We're not here to shame history," she said. "We're here to change its echo." The Dignity Fund would offer 0 collateral startup grants for aging black entrepreneurs, pro bono advisory for those denied by other institutions, and mobile branches in underrepresented neighborhoods. But more than that, it was about soul repair. And in the back of the room stood Kyle. You could tell by the way he held his notebook, clutched like a life preserver, that something in him was trying not to drown. Weeks before, he'd been part of the problem. Too quick with casual tones, too blind to the weight of his assumptions. Since then, he'd stayed quiet, but not idle. He spent nights reading archived rejection letters, found the names of those denied for what he now knew were coded reasons: insufficient cultural fit, uncertain financial maturity. He visited the old neighborhoods that no longer appeared on corporate maps. But what changed him wasn't guilt. It was Mrs. Green. She walked into the bank on a rainy Tuesday, 79 years old, cane in hand. She asked for Kyle by name. He blinked, surprised. "You helped my niece," she said. "Taught her how to read her business credit. She told me you're different now. I wanted to see for myself." That day, he didn't offer advice. He just listened. When she left, she tapped his wrist and said, "You don't owe us an apology. You owe us your effort. Keep paying." And she smiled. After that, Kyle went to Harold. No speech, just a sentence. "I want in, not to redeem myself, but to be useful." Harold said nothing, just handed him the ledger. "Then carry the names. Know who came before you." Now, at the fund's unveiling, Kyle stood at a modest wooden table, guiding applicants through forms written in plain English, not jargon. He fetched water, smoothed jackets, translated banking terms into everyday speech. No fanfare, just presence. One by one, older clients returned. Some came in silence. Others asked for Harold, or Loretta. Some just wanted to be seen. That afternoon, as the sun warmed the sidewalk outside, Harold stepped beside Kyle at the refreshment table. They didn't speak. Kyle refilled a paper cup, handed it to a woman whose father once stood outside this very bank, denied entry. Their eyes met, Harold's and Kyle's, not in forgiveness, but in alignment. One generation had carried the pain. The next had chosen to take the work. No applause needed. Only footsteps moving forward, together. Hope doesn't arrive with a marching band. Sometimes it's just 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder, holding the past in one hand and offering the future with the other. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. A man in his 80s stepped through the glass doors of Liberty Crest's main branch, dressed in a worn gray coat, shoes dulled by time. His name was Mr. Joseph Amos. No one knew it yet, but decades ago, he had co-founded one of the first black-run financial cooperatives in the country, the same institution that, after mergers and takeovers, would become Liberty Crest. He strolled to the counter, holding a folder in his hand. "I'd like to inquire about the Dignity Fund. I was told I might be eligible." The teller looked at him briefly, then down at the documents. Her name tag read, Marissa. Young, sharp, efficient. The kind of employee who breezed through corporate training, but rarely paused long enough to read a face. She frowned. "Sir, this looks old. We no longer accept handwritten financial statements. Do you have someone who manages your finances? A grandson, perhaps?" Mr. Amos's lips parted slightly. He wasn't angry, just quieter now. "I came on my behalf," he said. Marissa hesitated. Then she pressed a button beneath her desk and summoned a floor supervisor. Within minutes, Mr. Amos was escorted out, not with force, but with protocol. A soft, "Thank you, sir. We'll review your case," followed by the slow closing of the glass door behind him. But Kyle had seen it all, from the mezzanine above, where he had been organizing files. He ran downstairs, caught the older man outside as he was folding the folder back into his coat. "Sir, please, may I see that?" Mr. Amos handed over the folder. Inside were handwritten ledgers, notarized signatures, and, tucked in the back, a faded newspaper clipping from 1968. Joseph Amos elected first black credit union chair. Kyle's heart dropped. Within the hour, Harold and Loretta were called in. They didn't raise their voices. Instead, they asked Marissa to join them in the founder's room, a small office located behind the branch, which was once reserved for investors, but was now used for reflection. "Do you know who Mr. Amos is?" Loretta asked. Marissa shook her head. "He helped build the foundation of the very bank you now work in. He did it at a time when people like him were told they couldn't even open an account." Marissa's eyes flickered. "I thought maybe he was lost. His documents looked off." Harold opened a drawer and placed an old staff photo on the table. Mr. Amos stood in the center. "We're not here to shame you, but we are here to ask, what did you see when he walked in?" Marissa whispered, "Someone who didn't fit the picture." "Exactly," Loretta said. "The picture is the problem." A decision was made. Marissa would not be fired on the spot. Instead, she would be placed in a week-long integrity practicum, shadowing elders, learning from clients, and writing a reflection on what dignity meant to those who had once been denied it. She accepted, but not all were so willing. Another employee, Reggie, had been overheard saying, "This place is turning into a museum. We should be pushing products, not feelings." When confronted, he refused to engage in the training. He claimed bias, corporate policies, overcorrection. So Harold, calmly but firmly, handed him a severance envelope. "You don't lose your job because you made a mistake," Harold said. "You lose it when you choose not to grow." 2 days later, a new plaque was installed in the front lobby. Hand-carved by a local artisan, it bore the words, "Every face that enters carries a history. Here, we honor that before we ever ask for ID." On the morning of its unveiling, Kyle stood beside Loretta and Harold as Mr. Amos returned. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought with him a faded binder filled with stories, photos, names, and loan documents from 1967 through 1985. He called it the Ledger of Those Who Believed. He didn't ask for funding. He came to contribute. And as the branch grew quiet, staff members gathered to listen. No speeches, no marketing. Just one man, his memories, and the truth that echoed through them. Kyle walked Mr. Amos to his car. The older man paused before getting into the car. "It's not the bank that gives dignity," he said. "It's the people inside who decide to see it." Kyle nodded, and as the sun dipped behind the roofline, Loretta stepped onto the front steps and stood beside them. 3 generations, one purpose, no titles, just legacy, in motion. Because dignity isn't taught, it's remembered and protected. Together, they walked in like anyone else, no grand entrance, no entourage, just 2 elders moving with quiet purpose and a history too heavy for most rooms. But no one looked twice, not the receptionist, not the young banker, not even the security guard. Because when Harold and Loretta Thompson stepped into the bank they built, no one saw them for who they truly were. They saw age. They saw skin. They didn't see legacy. They didn't see leadership. They didn't see the very foundation they were standing on. And that's the lesson. This isn't just a story about race or about age. It's a story about the cost of forgetting, about what happens when our eyes are trained to see power only when it looks a certain way. When we think of authority, we think of someone who wears a suit and speaks with a title. When we forget that presence speaks louder than credentials, we must be willing to notice it. Loretta didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand respect. She simply reminded them, "We're not here to be served. We're here to see if the house we built still stands on the values we laid beneath it." And that changed everything. Because the most powerful correction isn't punishment. It's a reflection. The kind that makes a room go still. The kind that lingers long after the story ends. So here is the lesson, drawn from silence more than speech. Do not let protocol replace perception. Do not wait for someone to prove their worth before you acknowledge it. Do not judge by age, skin, or posture and assume you know the story. Because the people you overlook might just be the ones who open the doors you now walk through. Harold and Loretta didn't come back to prove they still had power. They came back to make sure the place still had a soul. And that, perhaps, is the most vital reminder of all. Legacy is not what you build. It's what you protect. Systems do not give dignity. Individuals recognize it. And respect, if it has to be earned every time someone walks into a room, was never genuine to begin with. So take this with you. Before you speak, pause. Before you assume, ask. Before you judge, remember. Because the cost of forgetting is not just embarrassment, it's erosion, from the inside out, of culture, of values, of truth. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, let it live beyond this moment. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories like this, stories that hold up a mirror and ask us who we are. And be sure to check out our next video, where more lessons wait to be discovered. Wishing you clarity, humility, and the courage to see what's in front of you truly.